Under the dark, star-studded sky, the gates of Donggun's shelter creaked open, breaking the night silence. Inside, a weary man frowned, wondering who would come at such an hour. As he approached, he saw a cloaked woman standing before him. Without patience, he told her to leave, claiming the shelter was already full. But the woman's voice trembled as she pleaded for help, explaining she had nowhere else to go. Then she revealed a silver coin from her cloak, hoping it would change his mind. The man's eyes lingered on the glinting coin before he sighed and opened the gate wider, allowing her and the small child beside her to enter. The trio crossed into the dimly lit grounds, their shadows long beneath the full moon. He led them to a modest room, telling them that the shelter's rules and fees would be explained the next morning. With that, he turned to leave. The woman, Helen, bowed deeply and thanked him over and over. Inside the small room, Helen helped the boy sit on the simple bed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, telling him softly that things had been hard, but he should try to rest. She promised that the people he was waiting for would come soon. Comforted by her gentle words, the boy nodded and lay down to sleep. As moonlight poured through the window, Helen sat beside him, watching over his peaceful face. A sudden cough shook her body, blood staining her trembling hand. Gasping for breath, she whispered a final wish, that the boy might find happiness in his life. And then she went still. Moments later, the child stirred, calling softly to her. When she didn't respond, he reached out to wake her and froze. His small hand came away wet with blood. Panic spread through him as he screamed her name, his voice echoing through the quiet shelter. The commotion drew the shelter manager, who appeared with another woman, irritated by the disturbance. Clicking his tongue, he muttered about the trouble Helen had caused by dying there. The woman beside him asked what would happen to the boy. After a moment's thought, the manager decided the child could be useful. His hair color was similar to Pauline's, one of the women working at the shelter. They could pretend to be mother and son to earn sympathy and money. As Pauline entered, the manager ordered her to take the boy with her starting that day. The child sat silently on the bed, still in shock. The manager left, grumbling that the shelter wasn't a charity and that they needed to make a profit somehow. Donggun's shelter, outwardly known as a royal charity for the poor, was in truth a place of exploitation. Children were treated as commodities, their lives bound to the greed of those who ran it. Pauline looked at the boy with quiet sadness. Sitting beside him, she introduced herself and said he would now live with her. She took his small hand and told him gently that no matter what, he had to survive. If he could endure the pain, happiness would one day find him again. With a silent nod, the boy, Rowan, took her hand and followed her out. From that day, Rowan's life became one of begging. He stayed close to Pauline, whom he came to call Mother Pauline. Though their bond had begun as an act, her kindness was real. She shielded him from cruelty, protected him from bullies and vagrants, and gave him a sense of safety he hadn't known since Helen's passing. With her by his side, loneliness never took hold. 5 years passed. Pauline sat on a park bench one evening as the sun began to set. A cheerful voice called her name. Rowan, now 8 years old, came running toward her with a smile. He proudly showed her the bucket of coins he had collected. She praised his effort, and he quickly reminded her to rest too. Then, hesitantly, he mentioned a rumor he'd heard, that she would be leaving soon. Pauline nodded. She had found work as a maid in a noble's household. Rowan smiled through his sadness, saying she would do well anywhere. Laughing softly, Pauline ruffled his hair, teasing him to worry less about her. She thanked him for the past 5 years, her voice warm but tinged with farewell. Memories flooded Rowan's heart. How she had cared for him when he was lost and broken. How she had stood between him and harm again and again. His eyes filled with tears. Everyone he had loved, his parents, Helen, and now even Mother Pauline, seemed to drift away. Seeing his trembling lips, Pauline held his face firmly in her hands and made him look at her. She told him that people are never truly alone as long as they carry love in their hearts. Even if those they care about leave, their warmth remains inside. She told him to remember that, to hold on to every bit of kindness and love he'd received, and he would never truly be alone. Whenever loneliness threatened to overwhelm him, Pauline had told Rowan to close his eyes, place a hand over his heart, and remember that she would always be there, in spirit if not in form. Now, standing alone beneath the cold morning light, Rowan reflected on her parting words. The woman who had once been his shield, his comfort, his only family, was gone. He felt the weight of her absence pressing heavily on his chest, but her voice echoed in his mind, urging him to look inward, to open the eyes of his heart. So he did. As he focused on the quiet rhythm within his chest, a soft blue light began to glow from deep inside him. The world seemed to change. Even with his eyes closed, he could see. Every detail, every motion, every shimmer of life around him, as though the universe itself had opened to his gaze. His eyes flickered with that same ethereal blue light as realization struck. This was the power she'd spoken of, the awakening of his heart's eyes. In that moment, he could sense the warmth of the people he had lost. His mother, his father, Helen, and Mother Pauline. They were all there, surrounding him like gentle whispers of light. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered a promise to never forget them, to live as they had taught him to. A year passed. The shelter remained as harsh as ever, its cold walls filled with the noise of weary children preparing for another day of labor. Rowan, now older and more composed, still wondered about Mother Pauline, where she was, whether she was safe, and if she ever thought of him. He had grown used to working alone, assigned to District 1, the shelter's most profitable area. His quiet nature and kind smile made him one of the best earners, earning him slightly better treatment from the managers. That morning, Blake, a tall, broad-shouldered boy who supervised District 1, gave him a friendly pat on the head. Blake had always looked out for Rowan, often saying he'd make sure no one messed with him. It was Blake who had unknowingly helped Rowan understand what he'd been seeing all along. Those glowing clusters of light that dance around people were mana. Rowan had learned to see not just the physical form of people, but their energy, the very essence of life flowing through them. To him, the world was painted in living color, swirling currents of light and emotion intertwined with every movement and breath. Even so, this gift came with a cost. Sometimes the dual layers of existence made his vision blur, his mind spin with dizziness. Blake often warned him to stay away from mana cultivation, insisting it was dangerous for the untrained. Rowan only smiled and nodded, never revealing that he already understood it better than most. When he spoke to strangers, while begging, his gentle observations, "Your heart is beautiful too, teacher," often left people startled and touched, their generosity doubling in response. To the shelter, he was simply a lucky, sweet-faced boy, but Rowan knew better. His sight revealed the true colors of people's souls. That morning, as he sat by the roadside, coins clinking into his small metal container, Blake crouched beside him. He laughed in amazement at the pile of coins Rowan had already gathered. Rowan smiled, saying softly that people were kind today. Blake's face grew serious, warning him that not everyone liked seeing others do well. He told Rowan to be cautious, to report anything strange immediately. Rowan promised he would. But as Blake walked away, Rowan decided to keep his newest discovery to himself. For several days, he had sensed something unusual, people whose mana burned brighter than anyone else's. Two figures in particular had been watching him, their auras glowing in vivid orange light. Each time he spotted them, they disappeared with impossible speed, leaping over rooftops as if gravity itself didn't apply to them. He hadn't told anyone, but today, something was different. As Rowan stood to leave, the clatter of footsteps echoed behind him, too close, too deliberate. His heart pounded as his senses sharpened. Looking up, his glowing sight caught the unmistakable hue of bright orange mana on a nearby rooftop. The same figures were there. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were following him. Panic surged through him as he turned into a narrow alley lined with old crates and broken boxes. A dead end. Through his mana vision, he saw one figure closing in behind him, and another approaching fast from the side. His only thought was to reach the safety of the shelter before they could catch him. And with that, Rowan broke into a desperate sprint, the sound of pursuit echoing through the alleyway as the hunters closed in. Rowan's lungs burned as he ran through the twisting alleys, heart hammering against his chest. The sound of his own footsteps echoed off the cold stone walls, but behind him, the rhythm of pursuit never faltered. His pursuers moved like shadows, relentless and swift. Panic clawed at him. No matter how fast he ran, he could feel them closing in. Just when despair began to take hold, a familiar voice tore through the chaos. "Rowan!" He turned and he saw Blake racing toward him, his figure a blur of speed and strength. Relief flooded Rowan's trembling body. "Brother Blake!" he cried out. Without missing a beat, Blake leapt upward with astonishing force, catching Rowan midair in one smooth motion. "Hold on tight," he ordered. And then, with effortless grace, they soared, Blake's powerful strides launching them from rooftop to rooftop, the city sprawling beneath their feet. Rowan clung to him, wide-eyed. Even as danger loomed behind them, Blake found time to shout over the rushing wind, "Don't drop the money jar. No coins, no dinner. Got it?" But Rowan didn't answer. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with awe. He was seeing something. Blake noticed his dazed expression, but didn't press further until they landed near the shelter gates. Setting Rowan down gently, he gave quick instructions. "Go inside. There's been some trouble and all the kids are being called back. Just rest and wait for me, okay?" Rowan only stared blankly. Blake flicked his forehead with a half smile. "Hey, you listening? You're safe now. They won't come here. Pull yourself together, kid." Rowan managed a small nod. Yes, take care. As Blake ran off to handle the situation, Rowan stood frozen before the shelter doors, his heart still pounding. His mind replayed the scene. The way Blake's movements seemed to ripple with power, the air around him alive with invisible energy. He had seen it clearly through his awakened sight, the flow of mana coursing through Blake's limbs, surging and bursting outward with every leap. It was breathtaking. It was something he had to understand. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to mimic what he had witnessed. Slowly, he began guiding the energy around him inward. Through his breath, through his body. He focused on the sensation of it moving beneath his skin, circulating like a current of light. Then suddenly, something clicked. His body felt lighter, his senses sharper. He smiled faintly. He understood mana. Before he could test further, voices filled the corridor. Children murmured anxiously, wondering why they'd been called back so suddenly. A strict order for silence cut through the noise as the dorm master entered. He assured them there was no danger, just a routine inspection. Then his gaze landed squarely on Rowan. "Rowan," he said sharply. "Yes, dorm master? Pack your things. You're being transferred." Confused but obedient, Rowan gathered his few belongings into a small sack and followed the man out. They walked until they reached a large iron gate where another, higher-ranking man awaited. The two adults began to speak quietly, just out of Rowan's earshot. Curiosity got the better of him. Remembering what he had just learned, Rowan drew in a slow breath and focused mana toward his ears, enhancing his hearing. The world sharpened. Their voices came through clearly. "You're moving a child from the begging dorm to the main building?" the senior man questioned. "The director has taken an interest in him," the dorm master replied. "The boy's appearance draws sympathy, makes him valuable, especially after what happened in District 1 today. We can't risk another incident with the Union or those two runners." Union? Runners? Rowan's heart skipped. Could they mean the same people who had chased him earlier? His thoughts were interrupted when the senior man suddenly turned to him. "Hey, you there?" Rowan jumped. Yes, sir." "Come with me." He followed the man up a wide, spiraling staircase until they reached a heavy wooden door. The man knocked twice. "Amy," he called before opening it. Inside, a woman with short, dark hair looked up from her desk. Her sharp eyes softened slightly as she saw the small boy standing timidly in the doorway. The man gestured toward her. "This is Amy. From today onward," he said firmly, "she's the one in charge of you." Amy was introduced with a polite formality, her presence calm but commanding. The senior man beside her explained that Rowan came from the dormitory wing, and that, unfortunately, he still couldn't read. He asked Amy to keep that in mind, then quietly excused himself, leaving Rowan standing awkwardly before her. Amy's sharp gaze lingered on him, and Rowan felt a nervous sweat forming. She asked how old he was. "I'll be 10 soon," he answered softly. Amy nodded, then asked if it was true he couldn't read. Rowan, slightly embarrassed, admitted he had never learned. She sighed, saying it was understandable for a child from the dormitory wing. But then, with a faint smile, she told him she would begin teaching him to read starting tomorrow. He was to call her teacher, though in private, she said he could call her big sister. She tilted her head, studying him with mild curiosity. "You have a surprisingly refined face for someone from the dormitory wing." Rowan blinked in confusion and simply replied, "Yes." When he asked why he was being taught to read, Amy looked at him in disbelief. "You really don't know what reading sessions are?" she murmured, half to herself. Shaking her head, she explained that reading sessions were gatherings where people read books aloud. Sometimes authors themselves, sometimes nobles who hosted them for entertainment. Even the shelter held sponsor readings for benefactors. And if a child was lucky, they might be chosen for something called a special reading. Rowan's curiosity deepened. "What's a special reading?" he asked. Amy told him that children who read well often got adopted, and a special reading was when a child chosen for adoption read privately before their sponsor. She smiled faintly. "But that's far off for you, isn't it? You don't even know your letters yet." Rowan nodded quietly. Amy studied him again. Despite his timid background, there wasn't a hint of fear in his eyes. Her expression softened. She gently patted his head and said, "Come with me." She led him to a room where several other children were gathered. "Everyone, this is Rowan from the dormitory wing," she announced. "Get along well and don't cause trouble." She pointed to an empty corner. "That spot's yours." Then with one last reminder to stay quiet, she left. Rowan looked around the room in awe. For the first time in his life, he had his own small closet. A simple thing, but to him it felt like a luxury. A boy named Theo turned to him, wide-eyed. "You really came from the dormitory wing?" Rowan nodded. Theo grinned, saying it was the first time someone from there had joined their group. He introduced the others, Noah, Hayden, and Lily, and assured Rowan that they weren't like the rough kids from the dormitories. Good news, Theo added with a smile. You won't have to go begging anymore. We just take care of the library and help guests. Our group manages the books here. That one word, books, echoed in Rowan's mind. Later that night, as he lay in his new bed, he thought about Mother Pauline's words. She once told him that books held all the world's knowledge, that someone with his curiosity would one day fall in love with them. Now, surrounded by shelves of stories, Rowan smiled faintly. His wish had come true. The moonlight streamed through the window, soft and silver, wrapping the room in a peaceful glow. For a moment, it felt like the happy ending of a fairy tale. Time passed. Rowan's reading improved quickly. One day, Amy called his name, asking him to bring the book he'd read that day. She flipped through it quietly, her face unreadable. Rowan waited nervously. Then, after a moment, she smiled. You've done well. You can move on from children's stories to District 2 novels now. Relief washed over him. He thanked her, but couldn't help wondering what had caused her to pause earlier. Still, the thought of reading books from District 2, the adult section, filled him with excitement. Amy allowed him to stay a little longer. Rowan eagerly roamed the shelves, scanning one title after another. So many stories, so many worlds waiting for him. Then a massive set of volumes caught his attention. Their title read, The Birth of the Grafton Kingdom and the Union. He opened one, fascinated by the maps and detailed histories inside. The book told of how the world had been unified, one kingdom and 6 principalities after a long war. To maintain peace, the king had formed an organization called the Union, which had governed for over 2 centuries. Rowan wondered if that meant they were all noble and good. But then, confusion crept in. If the Union was so righteous, why had Blake run from them? And why did the shelter seem to keep its distance? Something didn't add up. As he closed the book, a quiet question lingered in his mind. One that refused to fade. What were they hiding? The next morning, Rowan dusted the shelves, mana humming softly within him. His movements were steady, controlled. He had learned to let mana flow even while working, not just in still meditation. It wasn't perfect yet, but every breath, every motion brought him closer to mastery. And as sunlight filtered through the windows, Rowan felt it again, that same quiet determination that had led him here. The will to learn, the hunger to know, and the feeling that this was only the beginning. He had been training hard, carefully circulating mana through his body while he worked. But no matter how much effort he put in, the density of it refused to grow. It stayed thin and faint, just out of reach. Rowan sighed, but didn't let frustration take over. He decided to keep going, slowly, step by step. A moment later, the sound of a bell echoed across the room. The call to assemble. Amy entered, followed by a tall woman with fiery red hair, the deputy director. Her sharp eyes scanned the gathered children, her presence instantly silencing every whisper. She moved her gaze from one face to another, murmuring thoughtfully as if deciding who was worthy. Then she called out the names: Theo, Lily, Noah, and Rowan. Rowan blinked, surprised. His name? The red-haired woman explained that, while he wouldn't participate in the recital just yet, he'd only finished his first storybook after all, his presence would elevate the look of the group. For today, he would simply observe and learn. Rowan bowed politely, thanking her for the opportunity. She nodded briskly, and Amy clapped her hands. All right, you heard her. Get changed and meet in the reception hall. A few of the boys who weren't chosen muttered under their breath. One of them grumbled about how unfair it was that Rowan got picked despite being new. Rowan pretended not to notice. When he changed into his neat new clothes, something inside him shifted. The mirror reflected not the ragged boy from the dormitory wing, but someone different. Someone who almost looked like he belonged there. Theo ran up, eyes wide. Wow, you look amazing. Rowan smiled shyly, thanking him and returning the compliment before Amy led him to a seat in the grand hall. The reception hall was elegant, almost blinding in its polish. A long table stretched across the center, perfectly set for guests and children alike. Then came the knock on the door. Amy straightened up. Everyone, posture. Several finely dressed ladies entered, their perfume sweet and expensive. But then one of them gasped softly. Oh my, you are... Rowan looked up. It was her, the kind lady who had once given him money when he was begging in the cold streets. He remembered her smile, her gentle eyes, and how she had laughed when he had told her she had a beautiful heart. Rowan, she exclaimed warmly, I'm so glad to see you again. How have you been? The deputy director turned, surprised. Lady Caroline, you know this boy. Lady Caroline nodded. I met him at the Bree Crossroads last winter. Rowan bowed politely, offering a soft smile. She beamed at him, saying he looked even lovelier than before. The deputy director quickly added that Thanks to the shelter, Rowan had learned to read and write. Delighted, Lady Caroline clapped her hands. Then perhaps he could do today's reading. The deputy director hesitated. Ah, he was only supposed to observe? Oh, what a shame, Lady Caroline sighed. I truly wanted to hear him read. The room went quiet. Then the deputy director smiled faintly. Perhaps he could read the final chapter as a small trial. Lady Caroline's face lit up. Splendid idea. As Rowan stepped forward, a strange calm filled him. He hadn't rehearsed the lines, yet somehow they were already etched into his mind, flowing back to him as if whispered by the book itself. His chest tightened with a sudden, unexplainable emotion. And before he could stop himself, he looked right at Lady Caroline and said, softly but clearly, I like you. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in quiet gasps and gentle laughter. The lady smiled, utterly charmed. Rowan began to read. His voice carried the gentle hum of mana as the words took shape. The story unfolded. Duke Roger's quiet confession to Barry, her trembling attempt to look away. But as Rowan read, something strange began to happen. He could hear everything, every tiny breath, every heartbeat, every sigh that rippled through the room. His mana sharpened his senses until the world itself seemed to slow. It was overwhelming, yet beautiful. When he finished, Lady Caroline's eyes glistened. That was breathtaking, she whispered. Rowan bowed deeply. It's all thanks to Deputy Director Jean Boo's guidance, he said with grace. Lady Caroline clasped her hands. Then, may I hear you read again tomorrow? Rowan smiled gently. I'll be even more prepared. Her delighted laughter echoed in the hall. Later that day, while shelving books in the library, Rowan reflected on what had happened. He realized that controlling mana wasn't just about breathing or focus, it was about understanding his own body's flow. He recalled a book titled Principles of Phenomena, Movement in the Human Body, and wondered if another book might deepen his understanding. He reached for one called The Meaning of... A sudden voice cut in from behind. The Meaning of the Castle, someone finished. Startled, Rowan turned, but of course he already knew who it was. He had sensed Blake's presence the moment he entered. Blake leaned casually against a shelf, smirking. It's that age, huh? Getting interested in big things already? He chuckled. Heard you nailed it at the sponsor reading. Too bad I missed it. Thought I'd at least come see the star in person. Rowan tilted his head. You were on duty? Something like that, Blake said with a shrug, but there was a heaviness in his tone. Rowan noticed it immediately. Did something happen? Blake sighed. Those punks who used to chase you, they're at it again. I'll handle them with the managers. Rowan smiled, confidence flickering in his young eyes. If you're getting involved, they don't stand a chance. Blake laughed, the tension easing. You've got quite the mouth now. He reached forward and pinched Rowan's cheeks with mock annoyance. Rowan winced playfully but didn't pull away. Somewhere in his thoughts, a line from an earlier book surfaced about how certain villains were kind to the people they liked. He wondered silently if that applied to Blake too. After a moment, Rowan chuckled. It's okay. There'll be more readings anyway. Blake released his cheeks, tapping the red book in Rowan's hand. Save that one for when you're not too tired. Don't burn all your energy at once. And with a final grin, he walked off, leaving Rowan staring down at the book, its crimson cover glowing faintly under the library light, like it was waiting for him to open it. Rowan chuckled to himself at a passing remark before Blake finally said his goodbyes and left. Left alone, Rowan began to wonder about Blake's connection to the Union. What kind of battle would it be if people who had truly mastered mana fought each other? Could he ever stand against someone like that? The thought lingered in his mind as he closed his eyes, drawing mana into his body and channeling it into the red book he was holding. A sudden crack echoed through the room, the book split clean in two. Rowan sighed in frustration, staring at the ruined cover. It felt like a waste. Before he could dwell on it, a knock came at the door, summoning him to Deputy Director Jean Boo's office. Inside, Jean looked exhausted, explaining that their benefactors had made an unusual demand. Several ladies wanted Rowan to be the star of the next event reading alone, without any other voices to distract from his charm. She seemed overwhelmed, yet determined to make it happen. When she asked if Rowan could handle a solo performance, he agreed without hesitation, easing her worry. Later, Jean gathered the children and announced a special reading. To everyone's surprise, Theo was chosen instead. Rowan congratulated him warmly, though he had half expected to be selected himself. Theo, smiling brightly, told Rowan that with his talent, he was sure to find a good home soon. After Theo left, life at the shelter grew busier. Rowan's days were packed with readings, and his name had started to spread among patrons. Amy informed him of another full day ahead reading scheduled for both morning and afternoon. Rowan thanked her, but admitted how draining the sessions had become. He asked if he could take short breaks outside, and Amy allowed it, warning him not to go beyond the backyard. Once outside, Rowan returned to his mana training. he focused on the internal flow of energy, trying to strengthen his control. He could feel progress, but he also realized how difficult it was to maintain concentration. Maybe his body itself was the limit. Still, he stayed patient, determined to overcome the weaknesses he had observed in others. He remembered how Blake had been exhausted after carrying him, and how even the Union members seemed to run out of strength quickly. It made him wonder if stored mana had its own limits or if external mana could be used instead. Focusing on a leaf, he channeled his energy carefully. To his surprise, the leaf floated upward, confirming his theory. Time passed, and another special reading was announced, this time for Lily. The children congratulated her, and Lily approached Rowan nervously. She started to say something, blushing and stammering, but before she could finish, other kids whispered that the director would never let Rowan go, calling him their golden goose. Distracted, Rowan missed Lily's words, and when he asked her to repeat, she quickly brushed it off and left with her friends, her cheeks still red. Later, Rowan thought about what it would be like to leave. He imagined a new home, more books to study, and perhaps answers about mana accumulation. The next day, while practicing in the backyard, he was now able to move pencils effortlessly with his mana. Then a sound caught his attention, a faint thud. He turned and saw Agar, the dormitory supervisor, collapsing by the wall. Rowan rushed over, sensing the man's mana flickering weakly. Another man appeared and helped Agar to his feet, muttering angrily about the Union. The word struck Rowan, filling him with unease. The man told him curtly to forget what he'd seen and go back inside. Rowan obeyed quietly. Not long after, Amy announced that the afternoon-sponsored reading was suddenly cancelled. All the sponsors had been sent away and the children were told to return to their dorms immediately. Confusion filled the air. Such a thing had never happened before. Amy approached Rowan personally, her tone serious. She placed her hands on his shoulders and told him to get ready. He had a special reading to attend. Rowan adjusted his tie, unsettled by the sudden change. Amy's expression was more somber than ever. The recent events, Agar's collapse, the talk of the Union, the cancelled readings all swirled in his mind. Something was off. Amy turned and instructed him to follow. As they walked, Rowan asked if Lady Caroline was the one who had requested him. Amy paused, then quietly said, "It was someone else." Her voice carried a weight that made him uneasy. She didn't explain further. The path they took led them away from the main building, deeper into the woods, until they stopped before an unfamiliar, ominous structure. A worn sign read, "Shelter Annex." A wave of dark mana rippled through the air as Rowan stepped closer to the building. The pressure was suffocating, heavy enough to make his skin crawl. A man, likely the director, appeared at the entrance with a strange smile. He greeted Rowan and Amy hurriedly, insisting they come inside. The door closed behind them with a slow, echoing creak, sealing out all light. The entire building was windowless, the air thick with tension. Rowan's senses sharpened as he caught fragments of a hushed conversation nearby. The deputy director and the director whispering urgently. They spoke of salvaging what they could, of escaping before something arrived, and of a spell that had to be completed. Soon, the director turned to Rowan, pointing toward a single ornate chair. He ordered him to sit and read from the book placed there, saying it was part of the spell's condition. Rowan sat down, the heavy book resting in his lap. His instinct screamed at him that something was wrong. The room was dim, cold, and at its center lay a circular pit, pulsing with a strange purple glow. From it, Rowan felt the densest concentration of mana he had ever encountered. When the director commanded him to begin, Rowan started reading aloud. His voice filled the still air, echoing through the shadows. As he read, he felt the mana in the pit stir, as if something vast and unseen had awakened. It wasn't just mana, it was alive. It listened. With every word, Rowan felt emotions not his own washing over him. Joy, sorrow, anger, loneliness, regret, all at once. Then the realization struck. His own mana was being drained, pulled into the pit. He gritted his teeth and focused. He couldn't allow it to take everything. If this shelter really was being hunted, he needed his strength to survive. Drawing on every ounce of willpower, he tried absorbing the ambient mana around him, pulling it inward to stabilize his flow. The air around him began to swirl. Streams of raw energy gathered, wrapping around his body in a visible current. Against all odds, he gained control. He had managed to bend the mana flow to his will. The room remained quiet except for his voice. No new presences had entered, meaning the Union hadn't arrived yet. He had to stall, keep reading, keep the ritual alive until help came. In the shadows, the deputy director grew uneasy, whispering to the director that Rowan had been reading for far too long. The director's tone grew sharp. He muttered that the fruit should have ripened by now. Something wasn't going as planned. Moments later, the director and his deputy moved toward the back, fidgeting with a hidden mechanism behind a statue. A click echoed, followed by curses and hurried footsteps. Rowan sensed motion below. Then came a sickening thud. Someone had been struck. When he looked up, he saw the supervisor, Ager, lying on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The director's voice rose in anger as he accused Ager of betrayal. The air erupted with chaos as the director and deputy fled down a spiral staircase, chased by writhing tendrils of dark energy. Rowan followed quietly, descending into the shadowed basement. What he found below froze his blood. A grotesque, tree-like sculpture stood in the center of the chamber, its trunk formed of countless human bodies twisted together, faces frozen in agony. At its core was a single figure, pierced through the chest by a sword. Rowan's breath caught as recognition set in. It was Pauline, his mother. Before he could react, the director appeared behind him, shouting accusations and grabbing his arm. Blake's voice echoed across the room, cutting through the noise. He confronted the director, accusing him of murdering the other leaders. The director only laughed, calling it a game. Blake raised a shriveled fruit, saying he had followed them when they vanished and found this monstrous creation. Pressed to the edge, the director admitted everything. Rowan had been brought here as fuel, to create another fruit before the pursuers arrived. The ritual wasn't about knowledge or protection, it was sacrifice. Blake's fury ignited. He drew his sword and struck toward Pauline's figure. In that moment, Rowan remembered a question he'd once asked Blake. Why didn't he carry a sword? Blake's cryptic reply echoed back. He needed it for something else. And now he understood. The sword impaling Pauline was Blake's. Red energy flared around Blake's hand as the director yanked Rowan forward, covering his eyes. A sudden motion, a flash of pain, and Blake's gasp tore through the silence. Blood splattered across his face as Rowan's power exploded. An overwhelming wave of chaotic mana erupted from him, devouring everything in its path. The room trembled, the air screamed. The director's body was hurled to the floor, lifeless. Rowan stood at the center of the storm, eyes glowing with unnatural light, his body trembling but unbroken. Blake could only stare, whispering in disbelief about Rowan's power, how he had managed to grasp blood-telling. Blake could only stare, whispering in disbelief about Rowan's power, how he had managed to grasp blood-telling, a forbidden art. But Rowan wasn't listening anymore. His gaze turned toward the grotesque tree. He stepped closer. His trembling hand reached out and touched the spectral image of Pauline. Tears streamed down his face as a gentle warmth flowed from her form into his chest, the last of her mana. The hideous tree pulsed once with a bright blue glow before crumbling into dust. When it was over, only a faint red light lingered, and the silence of grief filled the room. Rowan felt something shift deep inside him, a quiet breaking of who he once was. In that still moment, a new presence stirred within, echoing a single plea, just a little more time. A warm, nostalgic energy flowed through him. It was Pauline's mana. Her essence merged with his, carrying faint traces of memories and love long forgotten. He could almost hear her voice, reminding him that even in loneliness, love remains, that the people we hold in our hearts are never truly gone. He remembered her gentle guidance, how she once taught him to close his eyes and look inward, to find strength and warmth in the connections he cherished most. Even with time frozen around him, the bond he shared with his mother stayed eternal. That love became his anchor. Blake's impatient voice broke the silence. He asked if the touching reunion was finally over, saying he'd waited long enough. He spoke casually, but there was a threat behind his tone. He told Rowan to come with him or die quietly, though he admitted it would be a waste to kill someone with such potential. Rowan calmly asked where Blake planned to take him. Blake explained they would likely be sent to another farm, a place where children were turned into living trees, just like the grotesque one they'd destroyed. Rowan would help him manage them. That, Blake said proudly, was the work of Rattel, his organization. Their leader sought to reshape the world through black magic, and Blake served him faithfully. Rowan's eyes hardened. He asked if Blake had created the tree himself. Blake scoffed, claiming he merely tended to it, that it was the creation of the high priest. He tried to sound modest, though his smugness betrayed him. Then he pressed Rowan for an answer. Time was running out. Rowan's response was quiet but steady. He refused. Blake's smile faded. With a frustrated sigh, he lunged forward, sword flashing in the dim light, but before his blade could strike, blue lightning surged around Rowan, freezing the weapon midair. Blake's eyes widened. He couldn't move. Rowan stared at him coldly and asked the question that had haunted his thoughts. Did Blake kill Mother Pauline? Blake only sneered, asking why it mattered. Whether he did or didn't, what difference would revenge make? That was all Rowan needed to hear. The lightning around him intensified, crackling through the air as his voice rose, filled with raw power. He swore that he would not let Blake live. In a single motion, Rowan twisted his wrist, disarming his opponent. The sword clattered to the floor. He told Blake he should have dodged. A heartbeat later, a shard of solidified mana pierced through Blake's chest. Rowan looked at him with quiet fury, saying he had brought this upon himself. He would never forgive people like him. As Blake collapsed, a new sound echoed through the chamber. Heavy footsteps, many of them. Voices barked orders from above. Soldiers descended the staircase, their armor glinting faintly in the gloom. A commanding voice cut through the noise, identifying himself as Deputy Commander Oscar of the Union's Faith Division. Oscar studied the scene carefully. His sharp gaze landed on Rowan and the lingering energy around him. He asked if the boy had learned this kind of magic at Rettel. Rowan denied it. He said he had taught himself how to use mana. Oscar didn't believe it at first, but there was no deceit in the boy's eyes. Intrigued, he introduced himself and asked for Rowan's name. As they spoke, another Union soldier approached and reported that the mana tree appeared to be less than 2 years old. Oscar frowned. If a high priest had been involved, there should have been traces left behind. He wondered if another group had interfered, perhaps someone tied to Shia's Reist. Turning back to Rowan, Oscar complimented his skill and composure. He asked him to demonstrate again by calling the blade. Rowan lifted his hand, and the broken sword shard flew effortlessly into his grasp. The display left Oscar quietly astonished, a 10-year-old child manipulating mana like a seasoned mage. Nearby, soldiers examined the remains of the tree. Oscar instructed them to search for more evidence. Rowan stood silently, staring at what was left of Pauline and the others. He whispered an apology to Theo for not playing with him more, and to Lily for not being kinder before she was gone. Oscar asked if he'd seen other trees like this before. Rowan nodded. He told them there were many farms, places just like this one. Oscar studied him carefully, noting how calm the boy seemed despite everything. He remarked that most children would have broken down by now, but Rowan's silence wasn't indifference. It was focus. Determined, Rowan looked at Oscar and asked to join their mission to help destroy Rattel's remaining farms. Oscar didn't answer immediately. He said they'd first complete their investigation, then decide what to do with him. For now, Rowan was to follow. As they left, Rowan passed the deputy director's corpse. Oscar paused only long enough to pick up a metal insignia from her body before ordering his men to move out. Outside, Union soldiers reported that there were no Faith Division casualties. The battle's toll was grim. 13 Rattel members dead, 3 from the shelter, and 2 who managed to escape. It was confirmed that high-ranking priests from Rattel had only intervened during the ritual's beginning, but no one could explain why it had collapsed so suddenly. Oscar ordered a full analysis from the 4th Stability Unit. As the soldiers began clearing the area, Rowan stepped into the cold air, his eyes set with quiet resolve. Whatever Rattel had done here, he would make sure it never happened again. Oscar listened to the report and gave a brief nod of approval before turning to Rowan. He asked where, in this grim place, the boy felt most comfortable. Rowan replied, without hesitation, the library. Oscar, expecting the conversation to take a while, suggested they continue there and let Rowan lead the way. Inside the familiar room, the two sat across from each other at a large wooden table. Oscar looked around, noticing there were no books about mana or magic. He asked how Rowan had managed to teach himself. Rowan simply said he figured it out on his own. When Oscar repeated the words of disbelief, Rowan smiled lightly and said he was just very smart. Oscar studied him for a moment and admitted he could tell the boy wasn't lying. Oscar then asked Rowan to tell him everything that had happened so far. Rowan paused, then began from the beginning how he came to the shelter, what he'd seen, and how things unfolded. His calm voice carried through the silent room, occasionally breaking as he glanced at the window. When he finished, he said he believed Mother Pauline had given him this power. Oscar listened carefully, still trying to understand. The boy had no formal training, yet had killed Augur and Blake, both highly skilled. He dismantled a ritual crafted by Rattel's high priest and was still using magic without fatigue or ritual words. A talent like that couldn't stay hidden for long. When Rowan asked if he could pose a question, Oscar allowed it. Rowan asked about the tree. Oscar explained it was a black magic device, built using human life as the base. Rowan remembered the talk of fruit and wondered what Rattel wanted with it. Oscar said the fruit was a condensed form of life energy, a crystal of mana. He showed Rowan the withered fruit Blake had been carrying unfinished but valuable. Eating it granted instant growth in mana and fetched huge sums on the black market. Rowan then asked about the reading sessions. Oscar said they were part of the ritual stability, a method to help the tree absorb mana and produce better fruit. Rowan thought back and said the tree always seemed to listen, almost like a person. Before becoming a tree, it had been human with feelings. Oscar agreed quietly. When Rowan asked to continue, Oscar nodded. Rowan wanted to know what telekinesis was. Oscar explained it was a form of magic that allowed objects to move with mana, like how Rowan was manipulating the sword shard. Rowan accepted this, admitting he didn't know much about magic yet. Oscar estimated his telekinesis was at a class 1 level, though unconventional. Confirming Rowan's age as 9, he brought up the boy's earlier wish to join them. He asked why Rowan wanted to trust the Union when he had been betrayed before. Rowan admitted he didn't fully trust them, but said his intuition told him Oscar was a good person, someone bright and pure. The words caught Oscar off guard. He asked if trusting someone for that reason wasn't too naive. Rowan replied that he was good at reading people. Oscar explained that letting Rowan join wasn't his decision alone. The Union couldn't just involve an outsider. Rowan asked if that meant he wasn't strong enough. Oscar said ability wasn't everything, some things mattered more. Rowan's face fell, but Oscar clarified he didn't mean anything was wrong with him. It was just that making an exception wasn't simple. Rowan pressed if age mattered more than skill. Oscar admitted Rowan's talent was remarkable, but experience mattered in decision-making. When Rowan asked if Oscar meant his judgment was poor, Oscar chuckled awkwardly, saying he hadn't gone that far. To test him further, Oscar decided to treat the talk as a mock interview. He asked why Rowan killed Augur. Was it just because Ager grabbed his head? Rowan said he acted because he'd seen others do the same. Ager and Blake both had the intent to harm, so he didn't hesitate. Oscar questioned whether his anger clouded his judgment. Rowan said he didn't deny being emotional, but believed his emotions made his decision clearer. Too many had died because of Blake, and even if Blake repented, no one would forgive him. He said he didn't have the right to let them live. Oscar asked if he then had the right to kill. Rowan replied that since he had the power and took responsibility, it was fair. Still, he admitted he acted on his own judgment. If someone demanded accountability, he'd accept it. Oscar asked if killing them had truly been necessary. Rowan looked up and said someone had to do it. Oscar fell silent at that. Then Rowan looked straight at him and asked if that wasn't why the Union existed to stop people like Blake and Rattel. The word struck Oscar deeply. He told Rowan that the Union's mission was to build a world where ordinary people could live in peace and pass that peace to future generations, a simple, human ideal worth protecting. He praised Rowan for his insight and composure, saying it was impressive for someone his age. Finally, Oscar explained that the Union's first division was focused on eradicating Rattel's farms and restructuring its branches, a mission that could take years to complete.